Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media Webinars. It's great to have you with us for today's discussion on South Africa's construction sector. We've brought together an excellent panel of experts who will explore what it will take to turn the country's construction industry around, identifying both the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead. A big thank you to our sponsors, Shell Lubricants South Africa, Standard Bank, John Deere, MDA Attorneys, and Mpho for their generous support in making this important conversation possible. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes. You'll find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please post your questions there at any time. Our panelists will do their best to cover as many as possible during the discussion. The chat is also open for your comments and insights. We encourage you to share your thoughts there. Just remember, questions go in the Q&A and conversations in the chat. The session is being recorded and we'll share the link with you afterwards. We're also streaming live on YouTube and that link will be posted in the chat once available. With that, let me introduce today's facilitator, Dr. Roelof Botha, one of South Africa's most respected economists. With more than 5 decades of experience in academia, financial journalism, business and public sector advisory roles, Dr. Botha brings unrivaled insight and credibility to any discussion on South Africa's economic outlook and policy dynamics. He'll be guiding the conversation with our distinguished panel, consisting of Chris Campbell, the CEO of Consulting Engineers South Africa, Mpho Mokwena, Technical and Services Manager for Shell Lubricants South Africa, Michelle Kerr, Director at MDA Attorneys, and Phakama Mbikwana, Executive Vice President for the Infrastructure Sector at Standard Bank. It's an impressive lineup and we're looking forward to an engaging discussion. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Roelof Botha to lead us through today's conversation. Over to you, Doc.
Thank you. I'm not going to mince my words as we share some slides which there should be an age restriction on these slides because quite frankly, let's call a spade a spade. The construction sector in South Africa is in trouble and it's been in trouble for quite a while. And there are 2 major reasons for that, maybe 3. Let's get back to that a little bit later. As we go through a couple of slides as briefly as possible, I think we'll get some more clarity on that. Just as on a lighter note, because the slides are going to become quite somber. Remember, a statistician, all the slides are based on fact. Obviously, I try to be as objective as possible, but it does remind me of the definition of a statistician because they're one-dimensional. And a statistician will tell you if your feet are in the oven and your head is in the freezer, on average, you are quite comfortable. But I wouldn't try that. So let's have a quick look at some of the key indicators that underpin construction. And we're all set. Can everybody see the slides?
We can.
Right. So don't get confused by the numbering of the figures because these are extracts from a report which I have co-authored, which will be published within the next couple of days, inter alia in an attempt to stop the Monetary Policy Committee from changing the inflation target range of 3 to 6% currently to a target point of 3%. For any economist that's been around as long as I have, to think that it is possible to have an inflation target point for an emerging market economy at the southern tip of the African continent, which is only 1 percentage point lower than the United States of America, is ludicrous. And this will have a detrimental impact without a shadow of doubt on the construction sector. It should be stopped in its tracks. The 3% ridiculous inflation targeting point debate. The upshot of this will be that we will have to live with a prime overdraft rate somewhere between the current one of 10.5 and perhaps even going back to where we were 11.75, which was the highest more or less the highest in the world of any economy of note. Right, so a quick look at a well-known inverse correlation. There you see the prime rate, the real prime rate, prime minus CPI, the red line. I specifically chose the color red as a danger sign, and there you have the GDP going down, down, down. No surprises. My grandson who's in grade 8 in office, I had to say that. So he understands this, by the way. The unemployment rate of South Africa, if I want to take you to that blue bar in 2013, the previous governor of the Reserve Bank, Jill Marcus, the best governor we've ever had by a long shot, and the only woman, by the way. I wish it's such a pity she retired. Quite frankly, she understood quite clearly that an emerging economy like South Africa should not have a real prime rate, the prime minus CPI, of much higher than 3%. And during her 5-year term of office, the average real prime rate was 3.4%. It is currently 7.1%. That is more than 100% increase in the cost of capital. So we're wondering, what's happening to construction? Why are building plans passed dropping like a stone, and have been? It's not only state capture, it's not only the infrastructure, it is primarily the interest rate. And we can fix that by the stroke of a pen. If I'd been governor of the Reserve Bank today and in charge of the MPC, our prime rate would have been probably between 8 and 9%. Now I can guarantee you we wouldn't have had time for this webinar. We would be out there looking at concrete being mixed. In any event, so there we had unemployment rate going up because of interest rates initially from 2015 to 2020, immediately after her retirement. The real interest rate just kept on increasing. We had COVID, it came down a little bit, and now it's back, it's at its highest rate well, in 15 years. The Afrimat Construction Index, which is a benchmark for this industry, picked up in the second quarter. We're grateful for that, but that's predictable after the summer holidays, which makes January not the most productive month of the year. February is the shortest month of the year. And then in March, we start preparing for Easter holidays. So South Africa Incorporated is not terribly productive in the first quarter of any year. But look at the long-term trend. That is not good. Volume of building materials produced. I mean, this is frightening stuff. You can see on many of these slides the COVID V. We took this hell of a dip in 2020. It recovered quite well, and it started moving upwards. And I think this is very important for the viewers. It started moving upwards, and then all of a sudden, from 2023, every time the Federal Reserve in the US raised the interest rates, the MPC did the same thing. Why? Is South Africa, the South African economy, similar to the US? It takes the US 5 days. 5 days to produce South Africa's annual GDP. They have a 4% unemployment rate. We have a 45% unemployment rate. These interest rates, the worst thing that happened to us next to state capture this century, quite frankly. There you can see the value of construction works in real terms by general government, the blue line, public corporations, the red line. The private sector, you know, compared to 2008 is still up. But they've also taken a hit, obviously, because of the high cost of capital. Your average monthly value of building plans passed in key provinces, Western Cape, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, going one way, that's going down. And just by the way, I mean, these slides are, you know, it's not encouraging. But just remember that in economics, we turn Newton's law on its head. What goes down must go up again. And all of these indicators can improve and recover as long as we have the right policies. And one of the right policies would be an interest rate that doesn't inhibit capital formation. If you look at average home purchase prices, last couple of years for every age group, just dropping like a stone. This is better bond data. Your gross fixed capital formation as percentage of GDP. Now, the world average is about 28%. So that's the average that a country spends on new capital formation. And capital formation is not a financial concept in economics. Finances help. Thank you very much, Standard Bank. It comes into the equation more often than not. But we are talking here about a tractor for a farmer. It's physical stuff that you need without which you cannot produce. For a small builder, it's a bakkie and a cement mixer. Just as examples. For a consultant like myself, it's a laptop and a fast car. And apparently a very pretty car, because I keep getting photographs of my car in the mail, which is very irritating, quite frankly. But if you look at South Africa's capital formation GDP ratio, that's the percentage of GDP that a country needs to sacrifice to build new productive capacity so that you can have jobs and GDP in future. And by the way, tax revenues. South Africa's is between just over 14%. It's half of the world average. This is frightening stuff. We must do everything in our power to lift that green bar. And the easiest, quickest way for the time being, it takes a hell of a long time to build a new road or to fix a harbor. And by the way, we're doing that already as well. But lowering interest rates, I can tell you, we can get cracking with raising that. And I just have to spend a bit of time on this, because this gives you a more or less almost a 2-decade snapshot of our economy in terms of capital formation by public corporations. So we were growing our economy at 5% per annum, 4 years in a row, which I'll never forget, because that's when I won the Economist of the Year award. I'm always the most optimistic. It doesn't sound like that right now. And I'm also a soccer fan, by the way. If you see me live, you'll notice that this skinny body was never designed to play rugby. And we created literally millions of jobs. Then came that global financial crisis. We recovered quickly. John Marcus was in charge of monetary policy. We had an average 3.4% real prime rate. We were growing at between 2 and 3% per annum for the 5 years that she was in charge. Then 3 disasters hit us. She retired. A new MPC was appointed by Mr. Zuma. Then we had state capture, a decade of state capture, and then we had COVID. But at least we've bottomed out, and with a bit of luck, we move forward. Interest rates have come down a little bit, and this is frightening. As that real prime rate increased, your year-on-year change in private sector employment just went down, down, down. And we need to change that very, very quickly. Otherwise, National Treasury is going to be in serious trouble. And I can tell the viewers that a 3% inflation point is not going to fix this. It is going to worsen this without a shadow of doubt. There you can see our unemployment rate compared to the rest of the world. We need to really fix this, because there is nothing more demeaning than somebody with skills. In a country like South Africa, with so much opportunity, so many resources, and so many skills that are still in this country, and that person cannot find a job. We must really create an environment that is conducive to construction. So just a quick snapshot. There you have the John Marcus era in the beginning. We had a real prime rate of 3.4%. We had GDP growth between 2 and 3% in real terms, 5 years running. Then came the period before COVID with the new MPC. Boop, up they took the real prime rate for no particular reason, because when global freight shipping rates increased by 700%, as what happened just after COVID, and the oil price increases by 400%, you are going to have a supply price shock in your economy, and interest rates cannot solve that. They can't do anything about that. You need to be patient, as Prof. Joseph Stiglitz says. Just be patient. These supply shocks will move their way out of the system. Higher interest rates are not going to lower the oil price. And we grew at under 1% thanks to the new MPC, mainly. Then I'm leaving COVID out of this equation because that was crazy. Then after COVID, they dropped the interest rate. The prime rate was 7%. And we went back to 2 to 3% growth. And then, because somebody there in the MPC thinks we're America, we just did the same thing that the FA did. We are not a high-income country. We are not the US. We didn't need what happened between the fourth quarter of 2022 and the first quarter of this year. We did not need that. There is no consensus amongst economists globally that inflation under 10% is bad for an emerging market. And the Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank needs to get to grips with this reality. Thanks. Nou wat ek so kwaai is. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, I'm usually quite calm, by the way. But we need to get cracking with construction. It's the most labor-intensive sector of the economy. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to my brief. Stop share. Stop share.
You are on the main screen now, Roelof. You can continue with the panel discussion.
Right, I'm just trying to figure out how to get rid of that baby. There we go. Am I still on the show?
Yep, you are.
Okay, I've gotten rid of my slides. Thank you very much. Right, Chris, let's start with you. I've been pretty harsh on the South African Reserve Bank. There are obviously other problems in our economy. As I've indicated, this is one way to kickstart, so to speak, construction, so we can get back to that era between 2005, 2006, heading towards the Soccer World Cup. And from my perspective, just a last comment, we can view the damage inflicted on this economy's infrastructure and the economy by the high interest rates as an opportunity to recreate that surge that we had en route to the World Cup. But instead of the World Cup, this time round, let's focus on fixing and expanding this country's infrastructure. And that could easily, if we follow the right policies, provide us, as far as I'm concerned, with that same growth impetus that we had. If it was possible for us to grow at 5% for 4 years in a row, it has to be possible in future. So, Chris, what steps do you believe need to be taken for South Africa to advance a critical infrastructure expansion and refurbishment program to address these years of neglect? Over to you, Chris.
Roelof, and to those of us who've joined us today, thank you. You've touched on the economy and those factors and decisions that need to be made that are critical to getting the flywheel of growth going. I would want to say that we need to also be looking at a whole lot of the other elements. There's no doubt whatsoever that if we want to grow our economy, I think it's global best practice. Every other country in the world, the US, the UK, are all using infrastructure development as a mechanism to drive the growth in their economy as we speak. So, as long as we mark time, and those of us who've been in any kind of marking time, you move nowhere. Nothing happens. And we start losing skills. What we need to get, and rapidly so, is to, we've got this wonderful government of national unity, but it's also a government of national uncertainty. We need certainty in our body politic. We need certainty in the policies. Because there is no investor, either locally or internationally, that's going to come and put money in the pot over and above just the straight economics that you're looking at. The rationale for that is, am I not taking a risk? Because one day somebody says this, and the other day another party says that. And then to add insult to injury is, will my money be well spent? Because we have this inability to put people who are patently guilty of corruption behind bars. There's no consequences. And similarly, we still have the scourge of a construction mafia. So we've got to get rid of all these risk elements that makes our economy more investor friendly and put it into construction as a start. It will catalyze many other streams in our economy if we can just get that portion going.
Right, no, thanks, Chris. I think most of the viewers and the panelists share that concern of yours. Okay, over to Mpho from Shell Lubricants South Africa. Mpho, the construction sector relies heavily on machinery performance and uptime. From Shell's perspective, how can improved lubrication technology and technical services support efficient infrastructure delivery?
Thanks, Dr. Roelof, and good afternoon to everyone on this call today. I really appreciate your time. Very insightful background, Dr. Roelof, and so quite some scary figures that you shared. But in the context of Shell South Africa, Shell globally, obviously we operate, at an operational level, so to speak, and we've seen over the last couple of years some of the historically large construction companies and going under, disinvesting and so that has also, added quite a bit in terms of the decline, or maybe because, there's no real big infrastructure projects that will boost employment. But, over and above that, if you look at it from a technological point of view, we've seen rapidly evolving technologies in this space, and not just in construction, but the industry as a whole, and which was further accelerated by COVID-19 pandemic, where we really had to very quickly adjust to the new ways of working. And Shell has been at the forefront of some of these technologies that we see today in the construction sector. And I think over the past 19 years, the best lubricant supplier globally. And this is beyond just oil, or beyond just the OEM approvals, because we work very closely with global OEMs in developing some of the technologies. But to your earlier point, we are appreciative of the external factors that affect construction projects, that affect construction companies. And it is our imperative to ensure that those that remain in operation at least have solutions and products to operate their equipment profitably, because there has to be some form of increased profitability. And we've transcended from being just an oil supplier and building, digital solutions for the key stakeholders in the sector. We've recently developed what we call a digital construction site using data analytics. Sorry, this word always runs away from me. To ensure we develop preventative maintenance measures for key operators. So we've gone beyond that, just being just an oil supplier, and then oil in the construction sector contributes 3 to 5% of the overall maintenance operational budget. But the biggest cost in those sectors is unplanned downtime. So our role in this sector is to work hand in hand very closely with the key stakeholders to ensure that we at least keep their machines available, operational, because as long as the machines are operational, they are able to deliver on the tight deadlines in the big infrastructure projects.
Thanks, Mpho. I must tell you that one of the most beautiful sights for me is a front-end loader. and people mixing concrete, or machines mixing concrete. Over to Michelle. Thank you very much for that. Michelle, there are 4 available CIDB endorsed forms of contracts in South Africa. I think many of the participants today understand that and are knowledgeable about that. But apparently, some of those are often amended to include particular conditions which change the risk balance recommended by the standard forms. Could you just tell us whether there are pitfalls? What were these changes all about?
Okay, thanks, Roelof. Hello, everybody. Okay, so at MDA, we specialize in construction-related matters. We're largely contractor-based attorneys. And we're assisting our clients with contract negotiation, contract review, risk assessments, commercial support throughout the lifetime of the contract. And when clients are entering into the contract, when they're deciding what terms are going to govern their relationship, we have the 4 standard forms that are available to the parties. Some are more suitable for certain types of work than others. So we've got the homegrown GCC, JBCC, and we've got the international NEC and the FIDIC that the parties are using. But what they'll find is that these contracts are very general, and they may not address a specific risk like we have in South Africa with the construction mafia as an example, in enough detail. So the parties will then want to draft some particular conditions that amend those standard forms to deal specifically with that risk or certain series of risks that they've identified. So that can be very helpful for the parties, but the difficulty with that and the concern with that, and what we see often with the larger employer bodies, is that these standard forms, they're meant to balance the risk, they're meant to manage the risk, and they're meant to allocate it to the parties that are most able to deal with that particular risk. So if it's the construction mafia, perhaps we want the employer to first be on the ground negotiating with the local communities, etc. And you want your contract to deal with that. But what we sometimes find is that the employer bodies may get a little trigger happy, and they're drafting these particular conditions in such a way is that they're pushing all of the risk onto the contractor, or perhaps the type of risk that would be better or easier managed by the employer body. And when that happens, you're making it unattractive. You're making it unattractive for the serious entities to want to engage in those contracts. You're making it difficult for them to make those contracts a success. So that is the concern and the major pitfall that we see behind the redesigning of the standard forms using those particular conditions.
Thanks, Michelle. Over to Phakama from Standard Bank. The question of whether South Africa has sufficient funds and financial systems needed to ensure the construction and maintenance of critical infrastructure. If you don't mind, I'm going to answer that, that question. Yes, I don't think we have any problem there. But could you maybe allude to what innovative financing can help to unlock long-term investment in South Africa's infrastructure, please?
Okay, thanks, Roelof and your listeners. I think you're quite right. We obviously have sufficient financial systems. We have deep markets, whether it be capital loan markets, to obviously fund infrastructure and infrastructure rollout. And I think I just want to touch a little bit on DFIs as well, because that's a critical slice or element to funding infrastructure in ensuring that we have fit for purpose and I guess value for money infrastructure delivered for our country and our people. So things like blended finance, we're finding South African DFIs and even international DFIs who are entering this market, playing in that space and making these projects affordable. So in terms of innovation, Roelof, I think the issue really around ensuring that we have sufficient constructing ability and construction happening in the country is really dependent on us taking our projects from concept stage to execution and financial close. It's not a money element or a money problem. The problem is the time it takes and the resources that are deployed to ensure that these projects move from when announced to market and to delivery. And there's a whole host of things which my fellow panelists have obviously touched on that go into that. Project preparation is a problem or is a challenge that I think needs to be jointly solved by financial services together with government, because it would flow in the instance where private parties or private investors had confidence in the procurement processes, for instance. But when there's challenges around procurement processes, where there's no transparency, when there's a belief by funders and investors that the rules of the game might, eventually change at some point, which they cannot anticipate or understand, then it's hard to invest upfront in project preparation. So we see that as one of the challenges, that it's not really lack of innovation, but I guess lack of clarity, which then leads to that pool of capital being dried up from the private sector space. And what then essentially happens is that you end up having donor funders playing in that space, and that obviously the pool of funds from donors is not extensive enough or deep enough. So the challenge really, Roelof, in my view, is not a lack of innovation where financial instruments or know-how in the country is concerned. It's really things like, mobilizing project preparation sufficiently, making sure that there's sufficient certainty for that project preparation to come through, and things of that nature.
Thanks, Phakama. I think probably quite a large percentage of the viewers would agree with that and have been subject to these very lengthy delays. Chris, just before I get back to you, just a quick word. I've noticed just one question that I need to quickly look at. There's one viewer that says that if South Africa's interest rates are the same as in the US, money will flow out of the country. Well, just 2 points. Number one, our interest rate is way, way higher than the US. So we've got no real danger from that perspective. We've got lots of scope for reducing that. But I can guarantee you that I'm not aware of any fund manager internationally that has South African money market accounts in their portfolio. People invest in South Africa because of our economic potential. And our economic potential is being hampered by the high interest rates. And then also, just on a positive note, we must just remember one of the reasons why I started out with, well, effectively just showing some stats about what is happening to construction in South Africa. You cannot scare in this modern information age, modern people with incantations and slogans, but you can frighten them with evidence. And I think it's time that somebody in government gets a fright. And that fright is the growing unemployment. We need to really get to grips with that. I'm not sure whether we're going to touch on this today, but I have to mention that the new Minister of Provincial Affairs as well has put a blueprint on the table, which I've had a quick look at. And this talks to the municipal problem that we have in South Africa. And we are all aware of the fact that a large percentage of our municipalities, none of them in the Western Cape, by the way, are dysfunctional. If we can take them one by one, because that is where infrastructure impacts on the daily lives intimately of South African citizens. And if we can just fix the municipalities one by one with private-public partnerships, and by the way, unfortunately, I have to add, with a little bit of police protection from not only the construction mafia, but the municipal mafia, as I call it. And if we can scare the living daylights out of one or two of these municipalities that are obviously corrupt, and replace them with people that are skilled and dedicated, then who knows, maybe we can clean up the whole mess. And that could act as a huge trigger for construction activity. But Chris, back to you. What do you regard as the most important critical infrastructure projects that need to be expedited? I think this is a question that everybody is thinking about. Over to you, Chris.
Chris, you're on mute.
Yeah, that was a goldfish moment. Apologies for that. So, we often hear these, we have great aspirations as a country. We should be getting to the level of smart cities and so on. But we need to take a couple of steps back and let's fix our infrastructure, basic as it is, because even that's not working. And then we can aspire. We often hear this political speak of the promise of some promised land of smart cities. And the projects we are there. Water. It's one of the biggest crises we sit with at the moment. In terms of water, availability to communities, and what are the systemic issues that are the cause of that. And then we also need to look at how do we use our water more efficiently and effectively, because we are, unfortunately, a water scarce country, something that people better believe, and we need to respond to that. And then, not trying to look at this sequentially, our energy. Great that we haven't had load shedding for a while. I'm sorry, the problem's not gone. We need to get that energy mix. And right now, we are still toying with a PPP on 1,400 kilometers of transmission lines, when we have 14,000 kilometers to get your independent power producers to be able to get that energy from the southern part of our country to the north. When is that going to happen? And so that's at a macro level. At a micro level, because of the neglect of maintenance at local government level and the shortage, and I would almost say the negligence in some municipalities, because you can't only ascribe it to a shortage of skills. It's also, do you care enough to get to ask for help? And so local substations, your cabling, water distribution systems at local level, they are so aged and in a bad condition that we're facing water shedding. We've had load shedding. You're going to have local load shedding if those issues are not addressed. And then last but not least, and we've got many other infrastructure areas I can talk about, is our local roads and provincial roads. You've got an entity like SANRAL responsible for national routes, but because of the inability of provincial government to be able to play their role as far as the secondary road systems are, you dare not go on any of those roads. It's perilous. They're potholed. And now we want to put the straw to break the camel's back and give that all to SANRAL. SANRAL do not have that capacity. And then we won't even go and talk about the impact on local roads in our urban environment. Your municipal roads are turning into dirt roads because of the negligence. So we have a plethora of projects and infrastructure that needs attention. And then we can start also then looking at what more do we need that will help grow our economy. Right now, we need to look at the infrastructure that can just sustain our economy as it is. Thanks, Roelof.
Okay, thanks, Chris. If I can just maybe add to that, I'm not going to disagree with you on the SANRAL issue, but what we do know is that our national roads are, compared to the rest, in an excellent condition, and that's relative. It's not, they're not excellent, but they're a hell of a lot better than provincial roads and rural roads, obviously. But surely SANRAL has the expertise to take over some of the responsibilities at provincial level, make sure that the people that are tasked with the responsibility of maintaining and fixing roads, that they do it correctly and that they do it timelessly. They get conditional grants from government to do this, and then sometimes those monies are not spent. So I think SANRAL can play a very important advisory role. I know for a fact that here in our Pittsburgh Dam region, they have been responsible for fixing some roads. Sarkie's Neck is one that I'm thinking of. But let's keep that debate lively. Okay, back to Mpho. Mpho, energy efficiency, lower emission, save the planet. It's the only one we've got, by the way, although Mars is an option apparently, but not in my lifetime. So what role can cleaner lubricants play in helping companies to meet all of these energy efficiency standards?
Thanks, Roelof. Yeah, I think the issue around green lubricants, so to speak, must look at it in the context of decarbonization as a whole, which has become very topical in recent years. Since the adoption of the Paris Agreement 2015-16, for everyone, to contribute towards decarbonization, reducing carbon footprint. government, I think this is one area we must all be sort of sympathetic because they have very high ambitions in terms of reducing carbon footprint, across our energy sector. And coming from a lubricants perspective, in part of contributing towards the decarbonization imperatives is to have products and solutions that extend towards the key stakeholders, operators, and I mean OEM, global OEMs, manufacturing OEMs, EPCMs, engineering, procurement and construction management houses. They also need to have from the supporting stakeholders solutions that will help them decarbonize in contributing towards government's ambition. In Shell Lubricant Solutions, we've had, as our contributions, we've had a portfolio of product that does exactly that, manufactured from plant-based base oils, looking to help, in terms of environmental contamination, the products can simply integrate. And it goes beyond that. Chris mentioned around the issue around cleaner energy. It's a very sensitive discussion in the sense that we are a market that's still really dependent on coal for our production of electricity and energy. But in the same time, we need to be looking at transitioning towards clean energy. So how do we support the basic energy needs against transitioning towards cleaner energy? So those are some of the things, projects that we look at, in terms of supporting the construction market, construction key stakeholders. How do we provide solutions? Because, as I said earlier, products in themselves, they are a means to an end in terms of, improved performance, of contractors, engineering houses, equipment OEMs. What we really need to be looking at is how do we make sure, as service providers, how do we make sure we optimize their operations for improved performance and profitability? Because all these macro factors, that we mentioned earlier, they, at the end of the day, they affect their bottom line. Whether a construction company can stay operational, but in a service provider, we need to put plans in place to help them stay afloat. In the context of the external factors that affect their businesses directly. So, energy, clean energy, green lubricants are a very key part of our strategy as Shell. Because we also understand that is another lever that is heavy in terms of the construction sector, because over and above staying afloat now, they need to also decarbonize and operate as environmental sustainable manner. So those are the projects that we involve ourselves in, and it's something that we bringing to the South African market. To the South African construction companies, giving that awareness and visibility to how best we can support them in that regard.
Thanks, Mpho. Right. Back to Michelle. Michelle, contractual and legal disputes are obviously a major factor in project delays and cost overruns. From your experience, what are the most common contractual pitfalls in South African construction projects?
Okay, so the standard form contracts deal with a series of commonly experienced events that will occur on a project that may delay or cause additional costs to be incurred. So that's really the concern of the parties. Am I going to finish the project on time, avoid incurring penalties? Will I be able to recoup any additional cost I've incurred over and above what was envisaged at tender stage? So what we're seeing a lot of is design issues. So the project isn't fully and completely designed before it's launched and before the contractor starts working. things are discovered, so maybe there's also unforeseen physical conditions. The design isn't as correct as the parties originally thought it was. Changes need to be made. Potentially this could result in a stoppage. It could result in work having to be undone and redone. And there needs to be provisions in the contract, and the standard forms deal with it fairly well, for the parties to be able to manage extensions of time, penalty relief, claims for additional costs, change management. How do they vary the works? And the process needs to be set up in such a way that it flows and the parties can mitigate and reduce as much as possible any delays and additional costs that are going to be caused by this.
Thanks, Michelle. You guys are certainly on top of this. Phakama, back to you. In your view, how can the financial sector work with government and industry players? I mean, that's the theme of the GNU, isn't it? You know, closer cooperation with the private sector to rebuild trust and create bankable projects that attract not only local but also perhaps some foreign investors.
So, Roelof, I think really what's critical for us as a country is to align more on defining public-private partnerships, because I think even when I look at media reports, when there's a PPP or what they call private sector participation, you know, the underlying sentiment is that it is privatization. And I think as a country, we need to demystify that really, because we have a government that actually at this point is challenged to fund large infrastructure project rollout. And that is why we have the construction sector sitting, you know, in this unfortunate position it is in, because projects have just not been coming through and work has not been available for construction players to actually do. And to the extent that we can all align on what is PPP within the framework that is there, what are PSPs, and essentially that government is not losing ownership by crowding in private investment and private operational capability to deliver where government is somewhat challenged. I think by demystifying that, to just clearly point out that privatization, which is wholly selling, you know, government assets and government capability to into the private sector, is different to PPPs or PSPs. It is actually crowding in what government at this point is struggling to get to be able to roll out. So I think if we actually started there and we all were on the same page, and then move on from that, I think from that landscape, it would actually go a long way in our country, because I think that distinction has kept us back quite a bit. I also think that, as I've mentioned, obviously procurement, transparency in procurement from a government perspective, I think that's critical, it's important. Mechanisms where there is private sector participation, clear mechanisms are important for private investors, because people want to understand, if I put my money in here, what's the structure, how long can it stay in place, how, you know, can I invest in it for 25 years or 30 years or whatever the case is. So that clarity is highly sought, and there are pockets in our country and in our government, you know, that have kind of articulated that. The PPP framework, for instance, is good in terms of having articulated that. Then I think from the private sector side, it's to also respond to the signaling that we're seeing from our government, because we've seen Infrastructure South Africa, the Infrastructure Fund, I think just gathering momentum around prioritizing projects, taking them through feasibility, going to National Treasury to raise viability gap funding, that when those projects come to market, or where government is speaking to the private sector by way of RFIs or whatever the case may be, for us to respond in an open fashion, transparent fashion, so that when they come out to market to tender out these projects, they actually are working off information that will allow private sector to respond to these tenders. So I think transparency from both sides is critical. I think transparency of mechanisms is important, as I said. And I think things like PPPs and PSPs being clearly defined is critical.
Thank you very much, Phakama. I love that word, transparency. And perhaps we could eventually consider, to improve our surveillance of senior public sector officials. Just to make them aware. There's a lovely song by Bette Midler, God is watching us from a distance. And one of the reasons why corruption has been declining in China is because of their very sophisticated surveillance system, where even your facial expression can get you into serious trouble. I'm not fully supportive of that, but certainly transparency is absolutely key. Chris, just before I get to you, there's a question that I'm trying to answer, and that is, what can we do to get a more sensible monetary policy? And I can let you in on a little secret, and that is one of our recommendations in this comprehensive report, which I co-authored on quantifying the damage that high interest rates have done on the South African economy and the construction sector in particular, is that government should seriously consider changing the composition of the Monetary Policy Committee. Instead of 5 or 6 politically appointed members, it should be comprised of 12 members, 2 from National Treasury, 2 from the Reserve Bank, 2 from Parliament, and then from the private sector, 2 from the financial sector, 2 from employer bodies, and 2 from labor organizations. So it's a 12-member, and all of these members need to have at least 25 years experience in political research, economic research and analysis, and at least a master's degree in economics. And the final appointments selection should be made by National Treasury. If that had been the case in South Africa today, then I can guarantee the viewers that our prime overdraft rate, which is an obstacle to growth, would not be 10.5%. It would be closer to 9%. So, but moving on to Chris, from Consulting Engineer South Africa's perspective, what structural or policy changes do you think are needed to strengthen project feasibility, planning, and procurement to ensure better long-term outcomes? Chris, over to you.
Yeah, Roelof, and from a consulting engineering South Africa's perspective, from generally what we're seeing from member companies, and what needs to be appreciated is we can no longer continue to procure intellectual services on the basis that we have, where we do the same for tea and coffee. The least cost is counterintuitive. And there should be better controls that encourage innovation. And we are not saying that there should be opportunity to milk the system, but our procurement regime, which, again, our wonderful laws, our constitution, and our great aspirations, they take so long to materialize. We've got this Public Procurement Act, which is going to replace the procurement elements in PFMA, MFMA, and for the first time, it distinguishes in primary legislation that there needs to be a different process for strategic procurement versus that for general goods and services. Strategic procurement of the goods and services, so that we no longer find ourselves willy-nilly purchasing toll trains, or we assume, and in our infrastructure procurement process, we ignore the total cost of ownership, where the total cost of ownership starts with, let's talk about the upfront engineering and the design. That's 2% of its cost through its 30, 40-year life cycle. That's over 5 years. In the next 5 years, construction, another 15% of its cost. The balance of the percentage sits in operations and maintenance. Yet, there's an assumption that if I have gotten bargain basement consulting engineering services, I have solved my problem. You've likely created a long-term problem. And it's because we tend to focus on what is the visible part of the expenditure. It's how much I've paid for the professional services. And we never look at what does this cost me to own and maintain over its life cycle. We need to take a more holistic view in our infrastructure investment. And I think, when I like what Phakama was talking about is the PPPs, because we already have models of those working in our water services. They're working well. We should look at how can we replicate that. Because the fact of the matter is, and Roelof, to the earlier point around SANRAL, it's not a criticism of SANRAL themselves. It's a criticism of as a shortage of resources. And at some point, if you overload an entity that's functional, they're going to become dysfunctional. And then even your national routes will start showing cracks. Sorry to use the pun. And I think we also have to guard, and I have to say this, if I look at international practice, we must make sure that as a country, even as the national asset owners, public sector do not lose sight of what their responsibility is, even when you go into those PPPs, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation that the UK now finds themselves with an entity like Thames Water. Outsourced the water provisioning completely, and it's becoming way too expensive. And the huge project that is now underway for the wastewater treatment, somebody's going to pay for that. And, so I think we have to be careful that we need to find that balance between the owner and the custodian of the asset, and they must know at all times when is the tipping point, because I may have conceded that ownership to the private sector, which is equally unhealthy. We need to find that best balance. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I personally wish there were more engineers in government. And I just want to remind the viewers, if they don't know about this yet, that the South African government in 2023 requested the World Bank to provide them with a roadmap for sustained high growth in the South African economy. That report was completed over 2 years and delivered to the South African government earlier this year. And I am very disappointed that they haven't actually delved into that to a large extent. One of the critical aspects mentioned in that report is that the skill set in the public sector at large in this country do not match the skill set in the private sector. And this needs to be addressed pronto for us to get anywhere in construction as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, back to Mpho. Mpho, give us a couple of useful tips on how can construction firms reduce the total cost of ownership and extend the lifespan of critical machinery.
Thanks, Rolf. I think there's a old saying, cheap is expensive, and as a key thought leader in the lubricant space, this is a narrative we've been driving and consolidating in our office. I mentioned earlier, and then also Chris touched on it just now. It's one thing to pay, anything. One thing to pay cheap, but the long-term cost of equipment, it's not about just the product that you paid. So we've introduced through partnerships with global OEMs, equipment OEMs, products that are tested, approved by most of the OEMs we see in the South African market, and introducing partnering with these stakeholders at solutions level, not just at product supply level, because only 2-3% of the maintenance cost goes to lubricants, but the rest of it goes to prolonging the lifespan of the critical equipment and to make sure that it is consistently available. Our global partnerships, with, as I said, the key stakeholders in the space, allows us to formulate those solutions. I mentioned earlier, our digital construction sites, which really works on digital analytics and performance of equipment, where operators can remotely monitor the performance of the machines without having to be on site. And these are some of the things we've introduced in recent years to augment our product supplies. In terms of lubricants, we've gone beyond just being a product or commodity supplier. But our approach in this space is always collaborative and technical collaboration, especially with our partners, because we've mentioned regularly through these conversations the challenges, external challenges that the construction sector faces. And it's our responsibility as service providers to ensure that we at least relieve some of the players from some of these challenges, the burdens that they are carrying, and making sure that operationally at least it's one less thing to worry about. So yeah.
Yes. You still wanted to comment?
No, that's fine. So I think it's our key approach in this space is providing the solutions and not just the products. And digitally, I mentioned COVID really accelerated some of the solutions that we're seeing today. Things that we wouldn't have imagined 15, 20 years ago, but we've had to adapt really quickly. And I think it's the same mentality when dealing with some of the construction stakeholders, that we need to adapt very quickly to the challenges that we're facing, because it's the only way we would really turn around this sector. And the adoption of digital solutions is one of those levers that we need to pull very quickly.
Thanks, Mpho. Right, back to Michelle. Can you give us some tips on how the construction sector can improve awareness, accessibility, and the quality of adjudication and arbitration when resolving disputes, please?
Okay, so most construction contracts, all the 4 standard form contracts, have provision sort of at the end of the contract to resolve disputes by alternative dispute resolution. Most of them are proposing adjudication and arbitration in the mix. For those that aren't aware of what these entail, adjudication is intended to be a quick and dirty process. The CIDB recommendations are that there is no hearing involved in resolving that dispute. It's done on the papers. It's supposed to be done in a relatively short period of time, whereas an arbitration is the equivalent of a private court trial. So we're moving away from the public courts, which are overwhelmed, and it can take a very long time to get a dispute through the court, into a private trial where you have an arbitrator selected who has the expertise that you need to determine the particular dispute. And usually the construction disputes are quite specific in their nature. With regards to, so there is a lot of awareness in the industry. Accessibility might be a bit of an issue, in that lawyers have noticed that they're missing out on an opportunity to represent parties in these adjudications, and they've started moving into the sector. And we are having, or we are seeing a situation where they're wanting to formalize these processes. We're ending up with senior advocates who are our adjudicators. We're ending up with much more procedural requirements that go into the adjudication. We're ending up with extended time periods that are being afforded the parties, and it's becoming a mini arbitration rather than what it was intended to be, which was this quick, dirty process to decide temporarily who is entitled to the money so the parties can continue with the process. So what we need, I would think, is strong appointing bodies that sort of understand what the requirement is, what the purpose of adjudication is, what the purpose of arbitration is. They're able to step in, be firm, appoint the appropriately qualified people. We also need strong adjudicators and arbitrators who are willing to manage the process despite vagaries or obstructions put in place by the parties who are now operating in a private space that gives them some more leeway to do that. And we'd also need to be looking at, and this is something that we at MDA have been advocating for, is a low-value dispute resolution process. So as we get the lawyers more involved in these processes, what we're seeing is that they become longer and more expensive. And we do need some sort of abbreviated process where we're actually bringing it back to basics. We're having a qualified person, independent third party, briefly look at a particular matter. It doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg because the value of the dispute is not that high. And churning out fairly quickly this temporarily binding decision in an adjudication that would assist the parties in going forward and would assist, let's say, a smaller contractor in claiming what is due to them without being subject to the vagaries of what a larger entity or the dominant party in the contract, what their attorneys can do in respect of delays and increasing of costs in the process. Rolf, and it's a bit off topic, but I just want to pick up on what Chris and Phakama have been saying about investment in infrastructure, water, roads, and encouraging PPPs and investment into those that kind of infrastructure through PPP. And that's something we're quite interested in at MDA. It's something we've been following. We have this really lovely model of these REI PPs, so the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer. That's a model where we had a collaboration between government and we had private entities coming into the country and investing, building infrastructure to be owned by the government, but operated for a certain period of time by these private entities. And we had years of models that were tried. There was trial and error and some failure, but ultimately we've arrived at this successful PPP model, which is attractive to private entities. There's a guaranteed buyback of energy in those circumstances, so you've got a guaranteed payment. There's step-in rights for lenders, who makes it quite attractive for them to step into to provide the financing for that. So that if there's any problem with the private entity, they can step in and appoint another contractor. So I just want to agree with Chris and I want to agree with Phakama. These are very interesting and topical issues. And I think more investigation into those are what is going to be taking us further.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That's exciting news. And please contact me after this webinar. I write regular columns, including for Media 24, and I would love to write an article on this model that you've developed. So more people know about that. Thank you very much. Phakama, you must have been very excited about the European Union announcement, together with quite a number of development finance institutions. About this, I think it runs into about close to 250 billion rand of investment package that was announced recently, hot on the heels of South Africa's removal from the grey list. This is spectacular news. I don't want you to talk about it too much because I also want you to maybe just tell us something about the problems with accessing finance for smaller contractors, please.
So no, it definitely is quite exciting, Roelof. I think any interventions that would allow us as a country to access funding to obviously fund these very important and much needed infrastructure in the country. So definitely are excited about grey listing, upliftment. But talking about access to finance for smaller players, I think it's important to understand that smaller players, firstly, are not an irritation. They actually play a very good role in the chain. They typically do the work that large construction players, don't play in because they either, lower margins or just need a little bit more management that is not complex. And therefore, larger players are happy to kind of outsource and or include them as their enterprise development beneficiaries. So as banks, commercial banks, my understanding, I think all commercial banks actually have products that cater for those small players. Standard Bank certainly does. And it really branches or starts off with bonding facilities, so bid bonds, performance bonds, retention bonds, which are a norm in the construction industry. We provide those to them with obviously the necessary, I guess, balance sheet to back up in the instance that those do not, that there is an issue, a trigger event, if I can call it that. Secondly, we offer short-term loans or overdrafts or bridging facilities to some of these smaller players, which really looks very much like what large construction companies also get or enjoy from commercial banks. So in the instance that they've obviously done the work and have invoiced and payment hasn't come through, that they're able to continue to run their businesses. I think the challenge is not really the availability of instruments, but comes in again where, whether it's government or private sector that owes these smaller contractors, payments. You'll find that these payments then are not forthcoming. It'll take, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, and even longer for them to get paid. And you can imagine running a business where you've got holding costs, but you are not being paid for work done. That poses a challenge, and invariably what it does is it drives up interest costs in those businesses, and then it strangles them. It doesn't give them the ability to grow and then migrate into becoming, mid-sized and ultimately, I guess, bigger companies in the future. So in terms of just innovation, and products being available to cater for them, the market certainly does have, and even spans bigger or bigger than what banks offer. We even have insurance guarantees or insurers like the likes of your Lombards, providing similar instruments to ensure that these players have access to them and can actually participate in these infrastructure rollout projects. So I think that's my take on it, Roelof.
Thank you very much, Phakama. And that's obviously also good to know. We're running out of time almost. I just want to throw a thought here into the pot and then conclude with a quick question for Chris. And that is that I think I know that everybody will agree that if we can remove the obstacles one by one that stand in the way of number one, repairing, and number two, expanding this country's infrastructure, starting with the basics, as Chris has mentioned, water, sewage, access roads, etc. Going back to the RDP housing era, where we built 3 million RDP houses, bricks and mortar, over a period of a little bit more than a decade, and we created millions of jobs. Going back to that model, to see if we, especially through PPPs, if we can't just take it up from there. This time around, make sure there's a JoJo tank so we can harvest rainwater, allow people to start vegetable gardens, do it smart, not smart cities. I really like Chris's comment about it. Let's start with small towns, or smart towns, small smart towns, etc. But if one of the obstacles in the path of infrastructure development and maintenance and repair, which can create obviously lots of jobs in future, involves the ideological objectives of government, specifically with B, then could government not consider looking at that World Bank report, talking to industry, the private sector, and put a moratorium or an alternative to some of the current strict regulations? We are over-regulated, and I think everybody agrees with that, in place. And my suggestion would be, and this has been very successful in other countries, is mentorship. So I don't have to tell anybody here that, South Africans have moved to other parts of the world. 1 million highly skilled people are sitting in Australia, Canada, the US, and the UK alone. There's a dearth of some of these technical skills. So government needs to address this and put a moratorium temporarily differentiated, so they don't have to let go of this promise they made during elections, but just be a little bit smarter about how we implement that. Chris, let's close with you. How can the country rebuild and retain critical engineering skills in line with what I've just mentioned to effectively plan, design, and deliver on projects?
So, Roelof, it's hard to go back to the past into the future. In the past, the bulk of the capacity, engineering capacity, was within the public sector. And some wise men came along and said, let's outsource everything. Unfortunately, it was overly outsourced. And so public sector definitely in many instances do not have enough capacity. In the private sector, we are now also having to deal with the fact that because there are not enough projects coming on stream and work, we have a skills flight. People need to earn a living. So they're going where the opportunities exist. And as I said earlier on, the UK, the US, they're all looking at infrastructure to turn the flywheel of the economy. They are equally short of those skills, Europe. And there go our resources from South Africa. We have amongst the world's best engineers. And this is not, I'm not smoking my socks. We are our intellect and what we have achieved as in the engineering environment in South Africa is revered the world over. And so here we are frustrating our local skills at all levels. Our younger guys who can't secure a job sufficiently, and our older guys because, it's hardly much activity. So we need to get our process going. There is enough work to do, enough use of our skills that can be made without us losing too many of them. Because the reality we face right now, I mean, we even seeing, if you continue to procure intellectual services on a bargain basement, Oriental Plaza basis, we're going to have mass immigration because of, just for that skills, because of the appreciation for the fact that actually, and by the way, I'm not even mentioning the risk related thereto. You have a structural engineer, and that is such a critical skill, highly revered, and they face the same risk as in the medical profession that your gynecologists and obstetricians do. In a litigious society, as we are becoming, and I want to maybe just touch on Michelle's point, arbitration is unfortunately also becoming too legal and driven by lawyers, and it defeats the objective of having arbitration as a legal process that can save you cost and time in resolving disputes. Our processes in the courts take far too long and they cost a fortune. Arbitration is going the same route. So we need to look at how do we manage the risks as well to be able to keep our skilled people back home and not have them overly exposed. Thanks, Roelof.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think with that, with the timeline I'm looking at, we should start wrapping up. Thank you for your participation. It's very obvious that we have a mountain to climb, but we've climbed mountains before in this country. We are such a resilient lot. We've got this 250 billion rand, that's the equivalent more or less of these euros, investment package coming in, inter alia for infrastructure, but obviously also for green energy, which in itself should create also opportunities for the construction sector. Let's get cracking and try to remove the obstacles one by one. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Over to you, Shannon.
Thank you very much, Roelof. Before we close off, I think I'd like to give each of the panelists a quick 60 seconds to just give their final words before we close off. So I'm going to start from the top of my screen, and that's you, Michelle. Would you like to give a quick closing remarks there?
Oh, okay, on the spot. So I've been talking about contract drafting, risk management, risk allocation, and that for us is what it's really about. We're wanting to make investment through PPPs in South Africa attractive. We're wanting to get going and looking at our basic infrastructure, our roads, our water, and it's all about putting together an attractive contractual model that is going to make people want to work in South Africa. At the end of the day, and we've canvassed this with our clients, trying to understand where they're coming from. It's all about payment, guarantees for payment. Do they feel comfortable entering into a particular model or contractual form that they are going to be able to succeed or exceed expectations? And at the end of the day, they're going to be able to make the money that they're hoping to.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Moving to you, Chris, what are your last words?
Yeah, Shannon, my last words in 60 seconds, and here we are in South Africa, great aspirations. We want to do a whole lot of things, and we have intention to do a whole lot of great things, but we just don't get started. We have this implementation challenge, and the challenge is a euphemism. How is it that we battle to get out of the blocks? So can we just get out of the blocks and now turn this country into a construction site? Our minister's got this summit tomorrow for the next 2 days. Can we stop talking about it and get the show on the road? Thank you.
Yes, following on from what Roelof said as well. So we hope that the right people are listening. Mpho, any last words from you?
Thanks, Shannon. I think from our side, like in any project, collaboration is very key, right? And I think as a country to turn the situation around, we appreciate the contribution that construction sector makes towards employment of the country. So we have to have a collaborative approach as service providers, as OEMs, as government, everyone involved in some way or the other in the construction sector needs to play their role and collaborate effectively. 40%, 45% unemployment rate, it's really scary numbers. And there's very easy, sometimes even obvious solutions that we can easily implement, to support this sector, from, the bottom up. It starts with us, the key stakeholders, participating in this sector, collaborating effectively for the sustainability of growth in construction. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mpho. And then last but not least, Phakama, anything from your side?
Thanks, Shannon. I think mine is just to say that we've done this before. We've got about 160 PPPs that are working in the country. We've got some of the professionals still retained in the country. Let's just dust off the framework itself, the legal framework, and get on board in just making sure that we can deliver more of these projects, because it really is the way to fund infrastructure rollout in South Africa and see our construction sector start to boom again. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Phakama. And with that, it brings us to the end of today's discussion. I'd like to say a very big thank you to our facilitator, Dr. Roelof Botha. You really encouraged an important discussion with our panelists. And thank you very much to our panelists, Chris Campbell from the Consulting Engineers South Africa, Mpho Mokwena from Shell Lubricants South Africa, Michelle Kerr from MDA Attorneys, and Phakama Mbikwana from Standard Bank CIB for sharing your insights, and to all of you for joining us and contributing to your questions and comments. We'd also like to once again thank our sponsors, Shell Lubricants South Africa, Standard Bank, John Deere, MDA Attorneys, and Mpho for making this webinar possible. You might have noticed that we also shared a link in the chat to an article by Engineering News editor Terence Creamer, who covered today's midterm budget policy statements, where he writes that Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has outlined his plans for shifting the spending focus towards infrastructure. So you can check that out and our website for more on that. The recording of today's session will be made available shortly, so keep an eye out for that link. We hope you'll connect with us again for our next webinar on the 26th of November at 2 p.m. It will focus on the automotive industry, with a panel discussing how to strengthen South Africa's automotive value chains to stay globally competitive in a changing market. The link to register for that event was also shared in the chat. And if you'd like to stay up to date with our upcoming webinars and news, be sure to sign up for our free daily newsletter or visit our website. You can also reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. From all of us at Creamer Media Webinars, thank you so much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.